I'm going to start by introducing Omer, who's going to moderate. Omer is the founder and CEO of Moxie Method, and I think the most important thing is a member of ICON's steering committee from day one. As founder and CEO of Moxie, Omer Malchin brings a rich degree of expertise in consumer branding and marketing to his work, along with notable achievements in the food and beverage, technology, and entertainment sectors. Omer started Moxie after successful terms as vice president of marketing for Contact Networks, Netflix, and Pete's Brewing Company. Omer is also a fundamental part of the ICON steering committee and has been in charge of ICON's brand from day one. So the name, everything, the shirts that some of you are wearing, everything that's Omer. Thank you. And Omer was kind enough to introduce us to Neil and invite Neil to speak today. Neil is founder and chief strategy officer of QI, a healthcare technology startup, building a virtual primary care system using AI and machine learning. Prior to QI, Neil was the chief product officer at Netflix, responsible for the design, implementation, and operations of the technology at Netflix. Neil and his team pioneered and developed many of the techniques of A/B testing and iterative product development to create a product used by more than 100 million consumers on a regular basis. And in my house, it's on a very regular basis. Neil has been member of Logitech's board of directors since 2010 and on the board of directors of Roku since 2017. He holds an honorary DSc and BSc degrees in computer science and electronics from the University of Durham, UK, and a PhD in computer science from the University of Aberdeen in the UK. Omer and Neil, welcome.
Hello, everybody. Your bio sounds much better than mine. That's okay.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here.
So you have a little bit of an accent, right? Which is
do.
not very unique here. But where are you from? How did you end up here? And all that stuff.
I'm originally from the UK. I went to school, as you heard, at universities of Durham and Aberdeen. And I came out here in 1984 on a summer internship that was supposed to last 2 months, and here I still am. It was kind of an interesting internship, and it led to a lot of things. I met Reed Hastings, who many of you have heard of as the founder and CEO of Netflix, and before that, Pure Software, and so we've had a long history together.
So you worked with him before Netflix as well?
Yeah, I met Reed pretty much on day one at Schlumberger, which was where I was doing my internship. In Palo Alto, you can kind of see the building over here. It's Venrock now. I had the interesting experience a year ago of pitching to the Venrock partners in my old office in the Schlumberger building, which was first time I'd been back there for a long time. Anyway, I met Reed at Schlumberger. Schlumberger realized that it was in the wrong business. It was an oil field business, and doing software was not really the right thing. So they dissolved the lab they had in Palo Alto, and 100 great people went off to do 100 interesting things. And Reed was one of them. And I joined him at Pure Software, and we did some of you may remember Purify. We did something that was considered pretty impossible, taking apart compiled code, checking into it, putting it back together, and then running it and having it check itself along the way. That was a cool tool, and we made a bunch of money from it and sold it to Rational and eventually IBM. And that kind of built the platform to go start Netflix and get going from there. We made a lot of mistakes at Pure Software, and hopefully we made fewer of them. We learned from what we did wrong at Pure and did a better job at Netflix. And I guess the results would make that seem true.
Cool. And we'll talk more about Netflix, obviously, but can you talk a little bit about the first days at Netflix, how it was, and what was unique about it? Also, maybe there's other things that people know and think about when they think about Netflix. Was the spark of it already there in the beginning, or it just evolved?
Yeah, I wind myself back to 1999 when I showed up at an office in Scotts Valley. and it was December, and it was raining, and my desk had a big puddle on it. I mean, this is this kind of startup life that many of you have probably been and experienced. And I had a folding table that had a sag in it, so my monitor was one of those. You remember those big glass monitors that, you know, a 20-inch monitor weighed about 150 pounds? Well, I had one of those on a folding table that was soaked with rainwater, and it was kind of leaning like this. And then at 4 o'clock every afternoon, we had to stop work and package DVDs in envelopes and lick up the envelopes and put stamps on them and send them out. Yeah, it was kind of interesting, but it didn't actually take that long because we only had about 200 customers at the time. So, you know, how long does it take to pull? And you can remember that 1999 DVDs were 2 years old. They were first released on the world in 1997, and I think there were about 200 movie titles on DVD at that point. So it wasn't a big library, and actually Omer kind of came in not long after that with the hard challenge of how do you market a service when only 1 in 200 people actually has a DVD player to be able to consume the DVDs that you're going to mail out. And so I know we struggled a bunch with how to be effective at finding those people.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. The red envelope helped a little bit. But,
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when I was stealing envelopes, because there were only 200 customers, we were also able to put sticky notes on the DVDs telling them that this is a good movie.
Yeah.
It was our recommendation engine.
That's yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
But it's true, we did.
We learned a lot about breaking plastic too, because the DVDs in the mail were. It's a little known fact. You know those envelopes. You know how they were kind of square and they had a floppy end to them.
Some of them don't know.
Maybe you don't. It turns out that if you ship a piece of mail in a rectangular envelope, it's considered a regular piece, and you can do it for 37 cents. You could then do it for 37 cents, 34 maybe. If it's square, it's an abnormal piece, and it can't be machined, it can't be automated, and so it's 50 cents instead. And you know that's the difference of profit or not profit. And so we put a little floppy end on the end of the envelope so that would be considered a regular piece of mail. But we deliberately designed it so the floppy end was leading. And when you put it through a mail machine, the floppy end would jam the mail machine. And then it would take some postal inspector to come out and yank the thing out, which meant that they tried hard not to let our envelopes get into the machines. Yeah. Instead, they would have people cull them out and throw them into a bin at the bottom of the belt. And so we would get the benefit of the low price rate, and we would have the mail hand sorted. And they were bright red envelopes, so they were easy to spot in the mail stream. So you could just sort of sweep them out of the mail stream and get things going well. And actually, when it had another benefit, when we ended up with 50 and then eventually 100 different mailing centers, what we wanted was the envelopes to go to the nearest mailing center, not to the address on the envelope, which might be across the country. So you'd send out a rare title from San Jose to the East Coast, but then you want that to go back to the East Coast shipping center instead. And the fact that they were non-machinable, pull it out of the mail stream and drop it in the bin, and then you just drop it off and not care about what the address was. That sort of worked in everybody's favor.
Yeah, the post office didn't know that they're part of a startup. Basically. Yeah. Yep. But no, I remember vaguely that we were playing with, if we bring the box with all the DVDs, or the sack, I guess, with all the DVDs by this time, it'll make it for an overnight without really. So we used the mail as an overnight system versus doing a FedEx or something. But I remember it had to be by 3 p.m. or lots of stuff like that. Yeah.
There's a really interesting story here. So that we're known as a company that did a lot of A/B testing. We called it consumer science, and I'm sure you'll come back to that. But one of the early pieces of A/B testing we did back in early 2000 What we realized quite quickly was we had a lot of customers on the West Coast and not very many customers on the East Coast.
Yeah.
But we were only shipping out of San Jose. And so the obvious inference was that, okay, and if you ship from San Jose to New York, it takes 3 to 4 days to get there, and then the customer takes a day to watch it, and then it takes 3 to 4 days to get back again. And now you've missed the Friday night again. And so you're taking 2 weeks for each cycle instead of 1 week, and that's catastrophic. And so what if we could put a shipping center in New York and accelerate the process and get it going? And that seemed like a really good idea. But we were smart. We decided we would test it and see how much difference it made. And so we engineered a system where we would hand carry the DVDs to New York and drop them in the mail, and mail them out and get overnight service in New York area. And then the discs would come back to a post office box in New York, and they would get recorded back there and then sent back. But we would simulate overnight shipping in New York. And then we measured, what do we care about? We cared about customer retention. If you remember this week, this month, do we provide good enough service for you to come back and stay and pay us again next month? And if we get good retention, we're going to build the customer base and make it better and better. What we found was that no, we didn't get better retention with overnight shipping. Now, how can this possibly be? We've provided all this value-added service. You're getting your disc 4 times faster than you were before. How can this not improve retention? And to cut a long story short, the bottom line was that we were using our existing members who had been subscribers already for several months, and we were trying to measure an improvement in service that they didn't care about. These were the customers who really only watched every other week. And they were quite happy with a service that took 8 days to round trip the DVD. And that was cool. And when we got the DVD to them in 2 days instead of 8 days, it didn't make any difference to them. And as soon as we started testing with brand new customers who had not experienced the service before, we saw a dramatic increase in retention. But it was the first lesson we had that A/B testing is great. Measuring real customer behavior where the variation of your product really tells you the right answer. But you have to be super careful about who you test, how you test, and what you measure at the end of the day, or you're going to get a wrong answer. So that sort of was a foundational platform for us for how do we want to build our consumer science platform going forward.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. I believe it's a coin phrase or term that came up and was born at Netflix, right? Consumer science, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And in that context, maybe the balance between good data and a good idea, and how do they work with each other?
Yeah, I have to back up a bit. So I came on to Netflix in '99. To run the engineering team, specifically the internet engineering team, building the website, building the choosing, building personalization. But I pretty quickly thought that I could do a better job of deciding what to build than the individual who was doing that job beforehand. And so I had lobbied Reed and said, I really should take on the product role too. And that kind of set us up to, I think I was one of the first chief product officers in technology, running both product and technology. But pretty quickly, I realized I'm not Steve Jobs. I don't have a vision for what we need to build, and most of us aren't, unfortunately. But I do have lots of ideas, and many of them are good, and many of them are bad. And how to pick the right ones, that's the hard thing. And so that's what we figured out. Consumer science was the way to ask our customers, what works for you? Do I do this or do I do that? And so it's all about building multiple versions of your product, deploying them to real customers, measuring customer behavior, and then interpreting those results to say, okay, customers care about this and they don't care about that. And a lot of that stuff is pretty straightforward. It just confirms what you suspected. But a lot of it's pretty surprising. You come up with some pretty unusual things you would never have guessed, or at least I would never have guessed. Many of my staff would never have guessed. And so the discipline of getting out there and building multiple versions and deploying it and then measuring a response. And I think that's become much more accepted 20 years later. But 20 years ago, that wasn't so usual. And even today, there are many businesses that don't practice that kind of measurement of what works and what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. You were talking about things that you learned based on that, or that Netflix learned, and some of them were, I guess, surprises. You mentioned one of them with the shipping.
The DVD shipping, right?
Another one that I remember from back then was the buffering. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and another one or two that are maybe interesting, for the people here.
Probably I'll come back to the streaming one later. We haven't got to streaming yet. That's 10 years in the future at this point.
That's true.
We did a lot of work. So what do we care about as a business? We cared about the number of new customers we got in, and then how many we got to retain. Well, let's focus on getting new customers in, and everybody knows about the sales funnel, right? You start with 100 prospects, and then you make a pitch, and you've got 50 people left, and then you ask them for their name and email address, and you've got 10 left, and then you ask them for their credit card, and you've got 1 left. And
the credit card doesn't work.
Yeah, the credit card doesn't work, and you're toast. So how do you optimize that funnel? I mean, there's a lot of leverage in optimizing that funnel really well. When you go into a physical store, think back now to you go into Best Buy, and you're thinking about maybe buying a Bluetooth speaker or something. And you're going to go in the store, and you're going to browse the product. And the idea that you would pay before you've seen the product is kind of anathema, right? And so along with every other e-commerce business, the shopping cart was kind of fundamental. You browse, you choose, you put it in your shopping cart, you build some emotional attachment to that thing, and then you go pay for it, right? And then you walk out of the store with your thing. Well, that's the way we set out to do the sales funnel at Netflix. And then one of my product managers had this idea. He said, you know what? There's so many people abandon their purchase before they get to the finish line. Why is that? What if we took away all the distraction of the movies and just took them straight to the finish line? You got to pay, and then we'll show you the movies. We all said, that's crazy. You got to be nuts. But we were disciplined, and we said, okay, we're skeptical, but you get to test it. And so let's go build that streamlined pipeline where we have a one-page thing that says this is a proposition, and then we take the credit card, and then you get to go choose movies. And lo and behold, it was actually about 30-40% more efficient. I mean, go figure. And we have tested that round about every 2 or 3 years for the last 20 years, and it still continues to hold true. And what is the chief complaint of customers about the sign-up process? You make me pay my credit card before I've seen the product. Why didn't you show me the product? Well, I'm putting a perspective on it that I don't know, but I think what happens is that people start browsing, and they're looking at this movie, and they're looking at that movie, and they're looking at this show, and they're getting excited about that thing, and they're watching this trailer, and then it's honey, it's time for dinner. And, okay, I'll come back and finish later, and they never do. And so I think that streamlining, getting people to the finish line, it's frustrating, it's surprising, but that was a really interesting learning from A/B testing that we never would have known just by guessing. And it's very counterintuitive to us, to our customers, but it really works. And that's the kind of thing you get by trying things out, unexpected things, surprising things, and measuring what happens and seeing the outcome.
That's interesting. Any other surprises? Oh, that's the only one.
There were plenty. Here's a good one. When you choose a show to watch, what's the most efficient way to choose that show? recommended, sure. Recommendations come up, but once you've clicked on the thing, so I like to say we have 30 seconds. Here's the thing: we've got 30 seconds to capture your interest, and after 30 seconds, you've probably lost interest. If you haven't found it, you're going to go on to Amazon Prime, you're going to go into HBO or Disney, and maybe they have something. So 30 seconds gets you about 2 pages or screens full of content. You get to see about 20 or 30 titles. You get to click on 2 or maybe 3, and you get about 5 seconds to digest that one page that says, you want to watch The Crown tonight. So, how do I use that 5 seconds and that megapixel of real estate to capture your interest the right way? I've got graphics, I've got text, I've got trailers, I've got laurel wreaths. What's the right arm? What do I want to feature to really capture your interest in that thing? Any guesses? Learn your habits. Yeah, but that's what I use. Your habits, and I use that to put 200 titles that are interesting to you on the home page and the pages you're going to go to. But now you've chosen one. You say, I'm interested in that one. I'm going to evaluate, is that what I'm going to watch tonight? How do I sell you that title?
Start running it.
Pictures. Start running it. Yeah.
Like it's the image that has the instant trailer without clicking. It just starts.
Yep.
That's why I don't browse Netflix anymore. I go to Amazon now all the time. I can't stand it.
Yep. That's fair. What I can absolutely tell you is that the team has tested 50 different flavors of this stuff, and for every person who goes to Amazon, we do pick up more people who find that the beginning to play it and then gradually shrinking away the rest of the UI is a good way to do it. But we learn things like. We started with 1,000-character synopsis, so describing the title in a fair amount of detail, 1,000 characters, and somebody said, well, that's too long. People are spending too long reading it. What if we made it 150 characters? 150. You can't say anything in 150 characters. Well, you can tweet, and I guess but reduce the thing down to tweet size, and actually, it's a lot more effective. Reduce down to 100 characters, even more effective. Reduce down to 50 characters, even more effective. So shrinking the text. Text is the wrong medium to sell the title. Make the picture bigger. That works too. But at some point, when the picture gets bigger, you get fewer pictures on the screen, and that starts to go down the other end of the curve. And so trying to guess the right size of the picture and the right shape of the picture. Okay, here's an interesting one. We tested... how many of you know how theater box art is constructed? The big posters, right, that you find outside the theater. They typically, big blockbuster movie might take $50 or $100 million to produce. It might take $50 or $100 million of marketing to buy one of the 7 slots in your brain. But then the other thing that happens is they'll spend $2, $3, $4 million creating that beautiful bus stop billboard that goes on the bus stops and that goes in the theater and all the rest of it. And you'd think, wow, there's so much time and money has gone into that. That must be well optimized towards selling that title. It's not. It turns out we did some really interesting testing. We had our graphic designers mock up or hack up 6 to 10 variations on the official artwork that was a $1 million piece of commissioned art that had spent months in production. And they would do stupid stuff. They would take the lead 2 actors' faces and paste them on a white background, or they would zoom right into the poster and make a small version of it. It turns out much more effective. And it turns out that what you really want on a postage stamp to sell that title is the lead actor and actress's face filling the screen. That's it. 3 people, you go down the curve. Doesn't appeal. 5 people, way down the curve. Ensemble cast, you're way, way down the bottom. You zoom in on the 1 or 2 people at the beginning. And then you start running into Screen Actors Guild, which has all kinds of rules that, you know, if you don't show all the people who are above the line in the screen art, then you've got a problem. And then we found out that, you know what? If you want to sell me the movie, you show the female star. If you want to show you the movie, you show the male star. And so we started doing customized box art, representing the thing for different people's interests. Maybe it's a crossover title that has rom-com pieces and thriller pieces in it too, and there's different artwork, different colors that appeal to different people. And that actually proves to be quite powerful. So you can actually do 6 or 7 different pieces of art, and different pieces appeal to different people in predictable ways, and that's great. And then you discover that you're featuring the black actor for black audiences. That's a really bad idea. You get hold over the coals, because now you're stereotyping, and that's a bad thing to do. And so, you know, this is just a case of, okay, we're going to throw all the art against the wall and use metrics and data to tell us what worked and what didn't work. But you know, you can run into social phenomena like stereotyping and racial profiling and stuff. It's a really fascinating thing. I'm sorry, I'm rambling.
No, it's okay. I'm jet lagged anyway. No, but I listen. It's okay.
Yeah.
So you talked about metrics a little bit, and like I remember, for example, that one key metric at the time, and I probably don't have it exactly right, was you know, churn after 6 months. Maybe you can talk a little bit, and I know it changed because the business changed, of course, but about key, you know, metrics, you know, how they were decided, and also the debate between metrics that is, you know, very important on paper at least, versus one that is very sensitive, so that it can be measured, and based on that, decisions can be made.
Yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, when you're tuning the product for members, the thing you most care about is how many of today's paying members are you going to keep next month. So retention is the answer. And retention is, at Netflix, it's in the 95, 96, 97% range, depending which cohort of people and when you're measuring. But to improve a 97% by a measurable amount means that you have to make the service twice as good. And so it's an incredibly insensitive measure to be able to tell, is a bigger box shot better? Or is a shorter synopsis better? Or is autoplay better? Or how many episodes should I autoplay in order to keep the maximum audience size each time? And so while retention is the North Star, it's not a measurement that you can make actionable for testing. And so what is? Well, our data science team did a lot of work, a lot of correlational work to look for indicators that lead to or correlate with good retention. And it probably won't be a big surprise that hours of viewing, if you view 100 hours of content in a month and you view 20 hours of content in a month, you're probably more likely to retain than you are. And so that's pretty straightforward. Now, of course, you have to be careful that correlation is not causation. That's something to be super careful about. But at the end of the day, if you can do a big test and demonstrate that increasing viewing does increase retention, now you've verified that viewing hours is a great metric to optimize in A/B testing. It turns out that of a cohort of 1,000 customers that you're trying to care about, some will watch 0 in a given month, and some, believe it or not, will watch 120, 140, 160 hours in a month, which is pretty much 2 televisions all day and all night. I mean, it's kind of insane. If you drive hard to increase hours of viewing, the way to do it is to find the person who's watching 120 hours and make him even more sleep deprived and get him to 140 hours, because that pulls the average up for everybody. So average hours of viewing is easy to move and actually doesn't help very much at all because it's not broad. It's not reaching everybody. It turns out that the measure that we chose that most represents the improvements in retention we want was pick a threshold of, say, 30 hours a month. Can you get, so 50% of people watch 30 hours a month. Can you get 51% or 55% or 60% of people to watch 30 hours with a difference in service? If you can, now you've moved a whole lot of people in the middle of the bell curve up to a higher consumption level, and that drives real retention value. And in fact, for some kinds of things, you even want to aim much lower. You want to aim at the 10th percentile or the 5th percentile, by which time you're down at the people who are not watching anything this month and getting to watch at least something. That is a really important driver of retention. So it's a relatively non-obvious metric. The metric then that you're trying to optimize is how many people can you get to watch at least 30 hours of content each month. And if you can get 52, 53, 54%, that's a winning experience. Then there's a subtle variation on that, which is movies or TV shows. You get somebody hooked on a TV show, and you've bought 30, 40, 50 hours of viewing. You get somebody hooked on a movie, and they're done today. And they have to choose again tomorrow, which is a real problem. So TV shows are relatively more compelling. But it turns out that if you assess the data really deeply, somebody who's watched only TV shows all month is a worse retention risk than somebody who's watched 9 shows or 9 evenings of shows and one movie as well. And so you want to take people who are watching all of one kind of content and show them more of other kind of content too, so that they get some diversity and some variations of experience, because that's what leads to a better retention outcome. So lots and lots of interesting metrics discussions to have.
Very interesting. I think Netflix and you at Netflix were also one of the first early adopters of cloud when Amazon started AWS. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well. Sure.
It was the year was 2008, and we had a I hesitate to say it. We had a system that was Visual Basic and Java on Oracle. Can you imagine? and it was run out of a leased data center in Santa Clara. And I don't know, 50 racks of gear in a room about this size. I went into the room once. You have to go through the double locked doors and have the retina scan and all the rest of it. It's a real pain in the butt. And we had people going in and out to service and maintain the equipment all the time. We had a firmware upgrade on the disk drive that corrupted the database, and our entire system failed, and we were out for 24 hours. It was catastrophic, and we were just starting streaming at the time. And as a DVD business, if people can't choose, they've still at least got DVDs at home to watch, so it's not so catastrophic. But streaming, you got to be up. You've got to have 4 nines of 99.99% of the time people try to play, it works. And we couldn't do that with one data center. And so it was, okay, how do we build resilient parallel data centers across the country, across the world eventually, that get the kind of performance that we need to do. And so we took that opportunity based on 2008 to say, okay, we need to do this cloud thing that was quite new at the time. So how do you get from a monolithic app talking to an Oracle database to a distributed NoSQL system with microservices when you're already at 10 or 20 million customers, and you don't want to shut things down and rebuild for a bunch of time? That's a really interesting problem. And we had a debate as to whether we should do slices of customers. 2% of customers go to the new system, and then 10%, and then 50%, and then 100%. So build the whole new system and then scale it over time. Or whether instead to do slices of functionality. You take some set of pages, you take the sign-up funnel and move them to the cloud. And then you take the choosing and take it to the cloud, and then you take the queue and take it to the cloud. And we chose that latter approach, taking slices of functionality and moving it across. And it was a fairly non-obvious choice. We ended up spending about a year building scaffolding and framework to synchronize our Oracle database with a new cloud NoSQL database so that we could run subsets of pages in both systems and have them appear to be coherent and consistent. And that was a big, hairy project. We ended up spending about 8 years rebuilding everything in the cloud in AWS. And it was so 2008 to 2016. 2016, we finally unplugged the data center. And shortly afterwards, we had no servers at all in our offices, in our data center. Everything was cloud and SaaS and all the rest of it. But it was a big challenge, not without its ups and downs, for sure.
I want to talk a little bit about Netflix as a company that was able to reinvent itself a bunch of times. I can't remember all of the different ones, but there was a subscription for sure, which now is
a standard. Yeah.
Standard, but it was a new thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there was streaming, which I think was always, even when I started, it was clear that at one point that'll happen. But streaming was a reinvention. There was a cloud. There was content, of course. I mean, content was not part of what Netflix was doing, and there was international and others. How was Netflix able to reinvent itself so many times? And I know some of them were rockier than others, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that too.
How many of you remember Quickster? Quickster.
I do.
Wow, so quickly, things roll away. So the occasion was we had piggybacked the streaming service on top of the DVD service. So we had about 12 million subscribers subscribing to DVDs by mail, and we had some really marginal streaming content initially, and so we made that available as an add-on, as a bonus, as a benefit, free benefit that came along with the DVD service. And then we started spending more and more money buying streaming content, buying the licenses to be able to stream the content, and adding that in. And we reached a point in 2011 when we were spending more money on streaming content than we were on buying the DVDs. And so it clearly became time to say, okay, we need to separate these services. Some people are only interested in DVD, they get to have a cheaper service. Some people are interested in just streaming, don't want the DVDs, don't deal on the mail. And they get to have a cheaper service. And some people want the two together because they've got the right collection of content. So let's have a hybrid with both in. And we managed to persuade ourselves, in spite of a lot of debate, that the right thing to do here was to focus all the energy on the streaming business, to cut the DVD business off and cut it adrift as a separate business to go its own way, and focus all the intellectual effort on the streaming product. And it ended up not going that well. And the DVD business was rebranded Quickster, which was a catastrophic name, didn't work at all. But the thing that really hurt was that we took what had been a $10 subscription for both DVDs and streaming, and we split it into $8 for DVD, $8 for streaming, and $16 for the hybrid of both together. So it was like a 40% price increase, which sort of represented the value that was being delivered to the customer, but it was not a smart move. So here's the lessons we learned from that. If we had not made that separation, we never would have transitioned to become an effective streaming business. We wouldn't have put the time, the energy, the money, the focus, the technology effort into making streaming successful. We had to get a revenue stream associated with streaming. And so separating the businesses from that point of view was absolutely essential. What we should have done is to grandfather all 12 million existing members in at their existing price and not try to increase the price on them all. And take the new customers and charge them probably not $6 more initially, but $3 more and then $3 more a couple of years later, and move it forward. But there's an awful lot of criticism of that move that we made that says that splitting a business up was a wrong move. I think that's a wrong observation, because if we had not split our focus and pointed it towards the streaming business, we wouldn't be here today. There would be no Netflix streaming business today. It would be a dying DVD-only business, and that would be the end of the story. And so really having the discipline to say, this is what will matter in 10 years' time. This is what we need to focus our attention and effort on. Let's put our eggs in that basket. That was important. The thing that we learned from that one, though, was pay attention to the transition and make sure that you bring the existing customers along in a way that works. So a tortured episode, but a very interesting one, a very powerful one for learning.
So I want to touch on the culture at Netflix. Obviously, it's well documented. A lot of things that you can find online about it, and anything from freedom and responsibility, and Netflix as a sports team and all that. I'm interested to know, from your perspective, you as a the chief product person in the company, how did you what worked for you as building the product team and the product, and what was a little bit more challenging maybe?
The culture is summed up nicely as freedom and responsibility, as you point out. The idea here is you free people up to do their best work by abolishing rules and unnecessary process, and say, okay, it's based on the idea that you hire senior responsible people, and then you say, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and then you let people figure out for themselves how they're going to accomplish that. And you encourage lots of communication, lots of sharing, lots of opportunities. And I would say that philosophy works extraordinarily well. The thing that I found myself quite capable of doing was let's make sure that everybody's pointed at the same set of goals. And so the clear objectives, the things we're trying to accomplish. And I would like to think that I could go to anybody in a 2,000-person organization and ask, how are you contributing to the ultimate goals? And have that person be able to articulate in a sentence or two, I'm going to accomplish this, which is going to drive that, which is going to make this better, which is going to lead to better retention or more sign-ups or something that matters at the top level. And so that works well. The second side of this is it's a culture of continuous self-improvement. How do you get a team of people where everybody wants to do their best work, and tomorrow wants to do even better work? Because that is the secret. You're in a business where the best performance is 10 times the average performance. Writing software, having good ideas about product. The best person is 10 times more productive than the average person. And so if you can really drive people to a little bit of self-improvement, that delivers a lot of value to the business. And a key to self-improvement is candidness, is transparency. It's being able to go to an employee and saying, I love that piece of work you did. I wish you had been able to do this, or I wish you'd been a little faster to dismiss that, or why did you ignore this person's suggestion? And that kind of critical feedback, it's very difficult to, most of us find it very difficult to deliver critical feedback, to say, that was good, but you could do better by doing this, or if that, it would have been a better outcome. Or please don't do this again. And that's something that all of us I think, have to struggle with, to fight, to be able to be clear and transparent, provide that feedback. And it's weird because on the receiving end of feedback, it might sting in the moment, but you realize very quickly that receiving critical feedback, you could have done a better job if you'd done this, is an incredible gift, because tomorrow you can do that, and you can do a better job. And so for all of you in other businesses, starting businesses, I would say that the most critical thing is to figure out how to tell somebody how you think they could do their job better, and to do it in a way that is a gift, is a positive, is a benefit, because that's incredibly important to up-leveling the skills and capabilities of the team.
Great. Last question about movies. What's your favorite movie? Oh, yeah. Wait, hold on. What's your favorite movie? Is it on Hulu or Netflix?
That's the favorite movie. That's too easy. It has to be Blade Runner, the original director's cut, not the new remake of that. But I have to say that Netflix has shifted in the last several years to become much more show-centric. And so, favorite movie is not the right question anymore.
It's true.
And
So you give me feedback, criticism.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll improve for the next question.
But I'm a great Nordic noir fan, and Nordic noir is, so I love the original Danish The Bridge, for example. I don't know if any of you have seen that. You probably have. But actually Netflix was, because of the broad reach and the personalization, it's able to take a show from Denmark and Sweden and subtitle it in English, and find the subset of the population in the US who'd be interested in that show and make that a profitable, useful thing. And so there's a real cultural sharing and enablement that comes out of a broad reach service like that, that I think is incredibly powerful. I'm very proud to have contributed to.
Thank you. So we'll switch from Netflix to a couple of other things, and almost there. So Cura is your new company. Maybe you can say a few words about what this is and what you're trying to do, how it works there.
Yeah, I realized at Netflix I was selling addiction. And this push towards 40 hours, 50 hours of viewing a month was fun, but ultimately I wanted something slightly more fulfilling. And so I found the right opportunity. The guy I had hired 10 years previously was able to step into my role, and I took a year off, and then I jumped into Cura, and we're doing virtual primary care using AI. The idea here that we want to scale, we want to provide the world's best healthcare to everybody. And there are two important pieces in that mission. The world's best healthcare means that we want to make the average doctor practice as well as the best doctor using decision support software that supports their work, supports their reasoning and their logic so they can do a great job. And to get it to every person means we've got to do it at a tenth of the cost of healthcare today. So today, a primary care physician gets paid, $200 an hour, and your visit costs you $200 for 15 or 20 minutes. They spend a lot of time charting. There's a lot of overhead. There's a lot of pain and effort there. And mostly what happens is you'll go in with a viral cold, and the doctor says, I'm not going to prescribe antibiotics. And you go out, and they say, take 2 days of bed rest and some Advil. That's about 30% of primary care visits. Let's eliminate that by automating it. Let's eliminate the interview where the doctor spends a bunch of time trying to figure out what's wrong with you, asking questions, getting answers. That's all completely automatable. Let's have the patient chat with a service that's mostly AI to conduct that interview, to find the chief complaint, to find the symptoms, to find the findings, to get the history, to get it all lined up. And then let's bring that to the right doctor, who might be a nurse practitioner, might be a primary care physician, might be a specialist, with a quick summary of what the patient has said. And then let the doctor do the final interactions and suggest a treatment, write a prescription, send the patient for testing. And now you can imagine that interaction cutting out most of the drudge work that the doctor has to do and getting the doctor able to deal with the patient in 3 minutes or 5 minutes instead of 15 minutes or half an hour with a half hour of charting to follow. And so that goal of making primary care instantly available on a smartphone app for all of the non-physical stuff. Obviously, a smartphone app at this point can't peer into your ear and see if it's clogged. It can only ask you to describe that. So the virtual, the non-physical primary care we can deal with, and that's what we're trying to do. Primary care, because it's very broad, we can reach everybody. It's not just, there's plenty of verticals that deal with specific illnesses and specific conditions. They'll never get the breadth and the coverage that we're looking for. And we think that we can provide that layer. Trillions of dollars of healthcare spending are directed by the primary care physician. And so if data and machine learning can help to send people for the right treatment or the right diagnostics or the right testing and not go off on a false path, there's tremendous savings in directed care that we can benefit from that too. So that's the goal we're trying to achieve. There are a tremendous number of challenges, regulatory and ethical and data and lots of things that we have to solve. But it's a chat app on a phone. And initially you chat with an AI, and then at some point it hands off to a human, and then maybe back to the AI. Another benefit of an app on a smartphone is it's available at 2 in the morning when you wake up with a headache. And then it's there again the next morning to give you a notification, say, did it work? I like to make a semi-snarky observation. If you go to a doctor and he gets it right, you don't go back again because you're cured. That's great. If you go to a doctor and he gets it wrong, you don't go back again because you go to a different one next time. And if you go to a doctor and he gets it catastrophically wrong, you don't go back next time because you're dead. So the doctor gets no feedback at all. And wow, that's a really tough environment to learn. He thinks he's prescribing great stuff, and you leave and you say, oh, that was bogus. And it doesn't work. So the idea of closing the loop, of being able to reach out to the patient at the moment, we predict that the symptoms should get better in 36 hours. So in 36 hours, we're going to notify the patient to click on a button and say, yes, it's better. And if it's not better, then we can say, okay, then here's the alternative diagnosis and the alternative treatment to follow. And so there's just tremendous opportunities here, I think, to make this work.
My last question, and then we'll open it up. Maybe you can tell the team here about your home.
Yes. Yeah, in my time off, I decided I wanted to build an interesting home.
Are you the Flintstones home?
No. That's an anathema of the home I wanted to build. I wanted. If you would drive past my home and you would say, you wouldn't even notice it. The idea was it was supposed to blend and look like it'd been there forever. It's this farmhouse in Los Altos, but I wanted to make it green in the sense of really healthy to live in and low footprint to operate. And so we pioneered a lot of stuff with interesting building materials. How many of you know what polyisocyanurate foam is? It's insulating material, and it's pretty much required for new construction. How many of you know? Have you read? Do you know what an MSDS is? A materials safety data sheet. And if you read the MSDS for polyfoam, it basically says if you're the fireman going in to put out a fire, you don't bother to try to save the occupants; they're dead already. Because it emits cyanide if it burns, and it burns very, very, very fiercely. So it's this great insulator, but it's not a really healthy thing to live in. And by the way, if it's mixed, it's two-part insulation that's 50-50. If it's mixed 49-51, there's toxic fumes leak out of it for about a year or two afterwards, and it smells really bad. So this is not the kind of material we wanted to use. We ended up using wool batting, which is it's basically big wads of the stuff that you get from your tumble dryer when you've tumble dried jeans, and you kind of scrape that blue fluff off. There's big bats of that stuff. It's just as good an insulator. The trick is it's not vapor impermeable, so the humidity in your house penetrates and soaks it, and then it gets wet, and then it's not very useful. So what do you do about this? Well, builders don't like to deal with that, but we spent a bunch of time and figured out you can put a Gore-Tex membrane on the inside of the wall to stop the vapor penetrating through. And then you can meet all the building codes and satisfy. And this stuff, instead of having to be applied by a guy in a hazmat suit with a breathing apparatus, can be applied by a guy with a t-shirt and shorts, handling it with his bare hands. I mean, it's a fabulous material. And it makes a really healthy house at the end of the day. That's one of like 50 decisions we made on
You have
materials.
30,000 gallons of water in your home or something?
We did rainwater capture so that we can keep the garden going in drought. Of course, after this winter, I'm not sure that was a wise choice. But I buried a 30,000 gallon tank, which is the size of it's 25 feet long and 12 feet in diameter. That's a huge hole in the garden. I can tell you when the bobcat fell in the hole, it had to be craned out again. I thought this was we had to get the bobcat driver in a hole that was 18 feet deep and 14 feet wide, without shoring on the side to drive the bobcat forward to be winched out. It's an interesting proposition. Anyway, now the tank's buried and I've got 30,000 gallons of water for the summer. Lots of fun. All kinds of interesting innovations in systems and materials in building a house.
Great. So thank you so much. How do we do it with the questions? Here, Yasmin will help.
Mic for the audience. Great. Yeah.
You didn't talk about the actual decision of the streaming. Like, how did that come to you? All of a sudden, you were doing DVDs. Streaming was not as, wasn't YouTube heavy then. Where did this come from?
Yeah, well, that was a long story. It was clear that the internet was eventually going to get there. You know what? For a long time, the actual cost of internet delivery was higher than the 70 or 80 cents of round trip postage. But I plotted this chart. Who's heard of Moore's law? Everybody's heard of Moore's law, right? Doubling of performance every 18 months or 2 years, depending which version. I've plotted the internet I've had at home since 1984. And it's 1.99 performance improvement every 18 months. It's exactly Moore's law. And that's what I can afford at home for $50 or $100 a month. So it's a perfect illustration. And when you plot that line, you say, okay, a gigabyte of movie is easy to deliver at some point. And that, in 2005, you could see it coming in 2010. In 2008, you could start to deliver it for people who are 2 years ahead of the curve. And now you can deliver it for pretty much everyone in the developed world. So the only question was how to do it. We made a misstep at the beginning. We set out to build a device that replicated the DVD at home experience. So we built a device with a hard disk in it, and we trickled the bits overnight. So you'd have 3 or 5 or 10 titles at your home ready to watch. And this was an expensive box, and it used a lot of power, and that was it was a waste of effort. So we wasted 2 or 3 years on that. And then we had an economic bust, and we had a round of competition. We faced down Walmart, who came in with a DVD by mail service. So the world's biggest retailer. And the stock dropped to $2 from 12 or whatever it had been in about a week. And that was really bad. So we canceled all these projects. And then we faced down Amazon, the world's biggest e-tailer. And they were going to do a DVD service. And we had just about launched in the UK a DVD by mail service. And about a week before we did, we killed that and said, no, we're going to focus on beating Amazon instead. We beat them. They never launched their DVD service. They call it Love Film in the UK, but they never launched it here in the US. And then we faced competition with Blockbuster. So all this time we had this streaming idea in the background. And then finally it became very clear it was definitely the way to go. And we came up with the idea that no, we can do on demand. It was about the same time YouTube was starting to come out. And then the fundamental issue was not a technical issue, was not a product issue, it was a licensing issue. It turns out if you purchase a DVD, you purchase with that DVD the right to rent that DVD to as many people as you want. So the economics are simple. $20 DVD, rent it 10 times, $2 a turn, you've made your money back, it's easy. With streaming, you have to license the rights from the studio, and you're competing with cable TV that's licensing that same right in a window. And so it's a big sum of money for stream it to as many people or as few people as want to watch it. So it's a very different proposition. And it turns out that licensing is hugely expensive because when you've got 2 customers, you still have to beat out a cable channel that's got 4 million customers in terms of what you're prepared to pay for it. So you start out with really shitty content. And then as you get bigger and bigger, you start to get great content. And then as you get to Netflix scale today, with 150 million plus customers, 160 million, you can outbid all the cable channels, and you get the best talent and build great content. But fundamentally, getting into that content requires writing huge checks and really betting that you're going to grow the business quickly. House of Cards was maybe the first big original streaming title, and that was sort of magnitude $30 million purchase when we had 12 million customers, and so there was no way we were going to make money back on that. But by the time we got to season 6 of House of Cards, the business had grown, and that was a really good deal at that point. But it was betting forward on growth, and being able to license the content was the key thing.
It seems like content is everything. We say that in cybersecurity as well.
Yeah.
So that's how content, original content, started, really to eliminate the cost to pay to others, but also influence what are you providing to your audience.
No, original content was more complicated than that. We started by licensing, so you essentially share ownership of a title. You take a title, and it's had a first window in theaters, and then it has a second window on DVD, and then you have a streaming window, and then it goes to a cable channel, and you get a fourth window. And so you still pay tens of millions of dollars for that title. But you're picking up the crumbs under the table because it's already been viewed. All the people who really cared watched it in the theater or watched it on DVD, and that's not that interesting. And so getting original content is about having something that's nowhere else. Nobody else gets to have it. Everybody said original content, the only way to make the economics work is you develop it, you exhibit it, and then you sell it on and have somebody else pick up the crumbs as well and help to make your economics work. And one of the innovations at Netflix was to say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to own the original content forever. We're not going to let anyone else have it. If you want to see House of Cards, you're going to have to subscribe to Netflix to come and get it. Okay, that's selfish, but it's also economically incredibly valuable. And so you've probably seen that Netflix is raising, spending $8 billion this year on original content. That seems like an excessive amount of money, and lots of people criticize it. The reality is you're building titles this year that are going to get watched for a decade. House of Cards was 2010 maybe. It still gets watched today, 2019. 10 years of value delivered from that thing. And so that $8 billion that's going to generate lots and lots of original titles will get viewed across the world for a decade to come. And will pay back over a long period of time. So that's what original content's all about.
Binge watching.
Binge watching, yeah.
Well, we actually ran out of time, so I want to thank you and thank everyone who came and wish you happy Independence Day, belated. Thank you very much.